actually joined the Army on September 10th, 2001. Of course, the next day we had 9/11, and that really changed everything, just everything.
We just looked at each other. We got out of our vehicles, we stared at each other, and we said, what just happened?
I'm honored to have been there so I can tell the story. We got to tell people the story, and then we got to let them know it didn't happen in New York, it happened to the country.
I think the effort to use the 20-year mark to try and pull something together that we as a country have never gone through before, 20 years of an ongoing conflict, is incredibly important.
On September 11th, 2001, nearly 3,000 Americans were killed in the worst domestic terrorist attack in United States history. Minnesotans found themselves on the front line the morning of 9/11 and in the military campaigns that followed. 20 years after 9/11, the Minnesota Military and Veterans Museum set out to document the stories of service members. Museum Director Randall Dietrich sat down with former CENTCOM Commander Joseph Votel to reflect on 9/11 and the response of fellow Minnesotans on that fateful morning. General Votel served as the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, and then as the head of Central Command, which has military responsibility for the areas where U.S. forces deployed in the years after 9/11.
As we are in the 20th anniversary year of 9/11, I think it's a really important time to reflect back on what the nation has been through and what our citizens have been through, and in particular what our citizens who serve in uniform have been through. I'm very anxious to talk about it and help inform Americans about what this whole period has been about.
Well, as a fellow Minnesotan, thank you. We appreciate you being on our team and joining this cause of collecting these stories before it gets any later. 9/11 is an event unlike anything in American history. How does a U.S. soldier experience 9/11? How did you experience it?
So I had taken over command of the Army's Ranger Regiment just about a month or so before 9/11. And I was actually in my office that day, kind of getting ready for the day, and it was going to be a day in the headquarters. And about 8:45, my secretary knocked on the door and said, "Hey, are you watching what's happening on TV?" And then, of course, like every American, I was instantly seized by what I was seeing on TV. When you first looked at what was happening on TV, I think some of the initial reports are, obviously a plane flew into this building. You think, how does this happen? How does an airliner get off so far off track that it crashes into one of these? And then you get into the realization that this is very deliberate here. And to be a bit nostalgic, I'm sure this is kind of the way Americans felt on the 7th of December, 1941, when America was attacked by Japan at the start of at least our participation in World War II. It was a seminal moment. And while I had this sense that we were going to do something, there was going to be a response, this was going to be big, at the time I didn't think I would be sitting 20 years in the future talking about this. It's a moment in history, and as horrible as it is, I'm very glad that I was in a position to be someplace where we could help our nation respond to that and help lead our soldiers.
In all, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 passenger planes, then crashed them into symbolic landmarks as events unfolded on live television. The attack originated on the East Coast, with the 4 flights targeting New York and Washington, D.C. 3 flights hit their intended target, but 1 crashed in rural Pennsylvania as passengers fought with the hijackers to regain control of the jetliner.
My name is Scott Wallace. I'm a survivor of the 9/11 attack. I was on the 63rd floor of the North Tower. The first tower hit. I grew up in St. Paul. I grew up on the east side of St. Paul, near Hillcrest Shopping Center off White Bear Avenue.
How was your day?
My high school sweetheart is my wife of 47 years, I believe now. We have 3 children, a couple grandkids. And then I ended up working for Deloitte Consulting, was where I was at the time. It was a pretty heavy travel job, and this trip was a very big opportunity for us with the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. So we went out there on Monday morning to prepare. So we spent the day in our offices, which were across the street from the World Trade Center. And then the next morning, we arrived at the tower early. You check in on the ground floor, and you get a badge, and it's got your picture on it and what floor you're going to. And all of the guys that I was with had met with the Port Authority before, said they were up in 93, because we were meeting with finance, and they're up in the 93rd floor. And when we checked in, and they said, well, you're on 63 today. And I said, and all the guys I remember talking about, they said 63, and they said, well, that's procurement floor. You got to go up, because it's a procurement for this big project. We were in a conference room right off the elevator bank. We got everything set up, so we were just waiting. And I said, well, I'm going to go down the hall because I want to see the Statue of Liberty. And so I walked up and down a little bit and realized I couldn't see it, so I was walking back from the windows when the plane struck the building. What probably took a couple seconds at most, it seemed to me like it just slow motion, because when the plane hit, we didn't know it was a plane. We just knew it was a really tremendously loud, explosive sound above us, and the tower tipped quite a ways. I mean, I remember stumbling towards the one wall and then stumbling towards the other when it righted itself. And all of us were kind of in shock at that point, and I could see down the hall to the other windows on the east side of the building, and all the debris flying by the windows, and everybody from that side of the building running towards me. The plane hit around 89 to 91 was where the plane went into the tower. And everybody above impact in the North Tower didn't get out. I remember getting on that stairwell, and I looked at the stair marker, and it says 63. And I thought, oh man, we have a long way to go down. And I thought, I remember praying to myself, just say, Lord, give me the strength to just stay calm and get down and get out of here.
I am Chief Master Sergeant Jeffrey Rosenthal, and I live in Lakeville, Minnesota. I'm a member of the 133rd Airlift Wing in Minneapolis. A C-130 is a 4-engine turboprop airplane. It's a transport airplane. That's the workhorse we fly. On that particular day, we were in airplane 96006. And of course, that's the airplane we were in during 9/11. We are like the military version of Uber, you know. Different services and agencies will call us when they need a cargo transport or personnel transported. To set the stage properly, you have to understand we took off at approximately 9:30 from Andrews Air Force Base with the intention of flying back to Minneapolis. And we had no idea at that time that the Twin Towers had been hit by aircraft. And the reason being is we had left the terminal and we were in the transport out to the airplane, in the airplane, started the airplane, taxied out, and that is when it occurred. And because it took air traffic control a little bit of time to digest everything and for things to unfold, as it does, we took off and nobody knew. Coincidentally, as we turned northwest towards the Potomac River out of Andrews, and then north on the Potomac River towards Reagan National Airport, our first inkling of something that went wrong occurred then when we were notified by ATC if we could get on a certain vector and fly towards an unknown aircraft, flying erratically. They know that there is an aircraft very close to restricted space, Capitol, the White House, that they can't talk to, they can't identify, they have no idea what's going on, but they know they have an aircraft that's traveling at 400 knots and is presumably heading straight towards Washington. This is in the span of seconds, really, because by the time you're approaching Reagan, by the time you're over Reagan, you're right on top of the Pentagon. They said, can you see this aircraft? At that very moment, the aircraft went through our windscreen from left to right, Flight 77, and dived right into the Pentagon.
went in the Pentagon. Looks like it went in the Pentagon.
That aircraft crashed into the Pentagon, sir. Understand you still want to go for 06 to descend to 2000, sir?
Go for 06, you can maintain 3000 and
When we got on the stairwell in 63, we went down about a flight or two of steps, and all of a sudden you couldn't breathe. For a long time, I called it white smoke. You couldn't see anything, but you couldn't breathe. And what it turned out to be was the jet fuel. When the jet hit, the jet fuel went down the elevator shafts, and there were ducts on the elevator shaft that were pumping it through into the stairwell. We got to around the 28th floor, and we saw the firemen coming up. And everybody kind of stopped at that point and let them pass. It was the whole company from Rescue 1. I remember patting them on the back and telling them good luck and take care. They gave us hope. I mean, that was the first time when we saw them, we said, oh, we might get out of here. We were coming down the stairwell, everything was pretty orderly, and all of a sudden, the tower you could feel the tower shift and creak and moan, and everybody in the stairwell stopped and looked up because we all thought, oh my God, whatever hit or whatever happened, this thing is coming down on us. And we all stood there. It probably wasn't even that long, maybe 15 seconds, just looking up thinking, oh, this isn't good. And then when we realized nothing was going to happen, we kept going, but it was when the South Tower got hit, the concussion rocked the North Tower pretty hard. That's what we were hearing and what we were feeling in the tower. We exited the stairs on the mezzanine. When I came around, all I could see was airplane parts and seats and bodies and all of that. So we walked us through the plaza and then up the stairs at the other end, and that was where the end of the plaza was. And there was a policewoman up there, and she just said, don't turn around, don't stop, keep moving. And that was the area where all the firemen were. And those 200 or 300 firemen that died were standing on that plaza trying to get organized. What are we going to do? And we probably looked up and were crushed by the building. The policewoman we went by, she died on the site too. She was one of the last bodies that they recovered from the site. In New York at the time, there was a phone booth on every corner. I pick up the phone, I call home, collect, and it goes right through. And I don't even know how that happened. And my wife picked up the phone, and she just breaks down crying. And it's me, and we cried for about 10 minutes. And then she told me about the Pentagon.
Shortly following the Pentagon incident, they had grounded all aviation nationwide. And at one time it was thought that Gopher 6 was the only airplane flying. We were that mobile satellite, eyes in the sky, that was able to give the strategic planners and assessment team what they needed when they needed it, so they could immediately do what was necessary to defend the nation. So now we're moving on to Western Maryland and through Pennsylvania when we're again notified. We have an aircraft. Can you identify? And our loadmaster, Robin Todd, did look out the window and was able to identify a large plume of smoke about 18 miles away.
The smoke was from the wreckage of Flight United 93, which had crashed as passengers fought to take back control from the terrorists.
The assumption was that it was bound eastward for Washington, D.C., and that the hijackers were overtaken by the passengers. They did a fine job of protecting the nation's capital. We're just fortunate things didn't unfold as they had intended.
My name is Mariah Jacobsen. I live in Northfield, Minnesota with my husband David and my 3 young kids, Rory, Reese, and Quinn. I'm a practicing attorney and a native St. Paulite, but currently Northfield, Minnesota is home.
Oh, look at there's Tom.
Tom Burnett was my dad, and on Flight 93, on September 11th, he changed the course of American history. Tom was seated towards the front of the aircraft. He was traveling home to San Francisco to see my stepmom, Dina. He caught an early flight out of New York. He'd been in New York for business. My understanding is that once the hijackers made themselves known and killed one of the passengers on the flight, Tom called Dina. He called her 4 times from the plane. The first time he called, he said, "Our flight's been hijacked. I don't know what to do." Dina was actually a flight attendant. Dina's training told her, if there's a hijacking, be quiet, sit still, don't draw any attention to yourself. And so that's what she told him. Over the course of their subsequent phone calls, Dina began to piece together, through what she was watching on the news, that this was a broader attack. This was not specific to Tom's plane. This was happening on multiple aircraft at the same time.
Let's roll!
After the plane crashed into the Pentagon, Tom called back again after the Pentagon crash for a final time, and he told her that they're going to do something. He and a group of passengers were going to get together and they were going to do something. And that was the last time she heard from him. Maybe it would have been easier for them to sit back and just hope for the best. Maybe it would have been easier to sit back and let somebody else lead the charge. But they didn't do that. He and the other passengers on that plane got together and they did absolutely everything in their power to make sure that that plane did not kill more people than had already been killed that day. And in the process, they sacrificed themselves. I think that it was maybe the first act of fighting back on September 11th that we know of. Flight 93 was really a symbol of we as Americans are not going to sit back and let terrorists destroy our country, our way of life. I absolutely think that it was a very powerful moment for us as a country. My oldest son knows Grandpa Tom died in a plane crash because there were some bad men on the plane. My 4-year-old girls are not quite old enough to really understand any of that yet. Most importantly, my husband and I really try to model the behavior that we hope that our kids will someday exhibit themselves. Be decisive, act boldly, be brave. I just feel so blessed to have him as my father.
In the aftermath of 9/11, the U.S. military began plans to target the terrorist group al-Qaeda, as well as Afghanistan's Taliban government, who had harbored them. As a commander of the 75th Ranger Regiment, Joseph Votel was central to the military's response.
Tell our audience, why were you going into Afghanistan? 9/11 happens, why are you landing?
Well, it was very, very early on we identified Afghanistan as kind of the locus for where al-Qaeda was operating from. And of course, they were being supported by the Taliban government. And it's important for Americans to recognize that it wasn't just the Taliban, it was the Taliban government that was in charge in Afghanistan and had given safe haven to al-Qaeda, and in particular to Osama bin Laden, and where a lot of the planning and coordination for this operation had taken place. So very early on, the administration at the time, the Bush administration, had recognized that if we were going to hold somebody responsible, that person was in Afghanistan, and that's when we needed to strike a blow. And so that's what brought us to Afghanistan at that particular time.
These weren't large American forces. These were special forces. Talk about that decision to go small, unconventional.
So, well, Afghanistan, when you think about Afghanistan, it's a landlocked country. It's an operation just to get to Afghanistan, much less to do anything when you get there. You have to fly over mountains. You're flying over vast areas of desert, very forbidding terrain. There's not a lot of infrastructure in place. And so the decision that was made was that we're going to conduct our operations both in the southern part of the country and the northern part of the country with small forces, largely built around special operations forces.
From the first days, Minnesotans were on the front line in Afghanistan. After 9/11, a small group of Special Forces soldiers was assigned to protect Hamid Karzai, who had emerged as a potential leader for a post-Taliban government. Mike McElhiney was part of the Special Forces group assigned to eliminate Taliban forces and protect Karzai.
Some guys had been to war on the team, some guys had not. And every war is a little bit different. And based on the intel reports and how these guys do things, it was scary. We were hearing about how these assassinations were going down, and there was going to be no surrender, I guess you could say. Getting captured was not like an option. You've got your mission. Our mission was a simple kill and capture al-Qaeda and conduct an insurgency, basically to roust the Taliban. We thought we had months to prepare for war. Well, like the second night there, we started getting probed by the Taliban.
Mike's unit was involved in multiple firefights with enemy forces. Mike was wounded by an errant U.S. bomb and ultimately lost his arm. Today, Mike serves veterans statewide through his work for the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs.
My dominant arm, my right arm below the elbow, amputated. Scars on my legs from shrapnel. Still have shrapnel. I can sit outside with shorts on and whatnot and see little pieces here and there and scars. These things happen. I was proud to do it. If I knew the circumstances were going to be the same, I'd do it again exactly the same way, because I think we did what we were asked to do, and I think we did it well.
Minnesotans played a role in military operations in Afghanistan for 2 decades. David Nguyen deployed with the 82nd Airborne Division in early 2002.
I felt the urge to get out and be part of something bigger and greater than myself. I remember very clearly September 11th, I was in my kitchen and my dad called me and he was very concerned. And he asked me if, are you okay? Is everything okay? And I'm like, I don't know why you're even. And then I saw on the news what was going on. And that was probably one of the most sobering moments of my entire life. I knew that I had just joined the service and that what was going on right now was going to directly impact my journey. They asked the trainees and they said, well, now who wants to join the airborne group? And it was just dead silent in the room. And so I was like, we're gonna do this. When we arrived to Afghanistan, I remember very clearly landing on the C-130 and waiting for the back tailgate to open up. And I remember looking at the back tailgate and being like, I can't believe this is happening. Like this, it wasn't that long ago that I was at my house in Minnesota. I remember the airfield. We landed at Kandahar airfield in Afghanistan, and it was just this vast, barren desert. It felt like it was the Wild West.
David completed ROTC at the University of Minnesota alongside Andrew Bundermann.
Andrew was a brilliant tactician. He could come up with things on the fly that you wouldn't think were possible.
The situation in Afghanistan remained volatile for many years. By 2009, Andrew Bundermann had been placed in charge of Combat Outpost Keating in northern Afghanistan, which was attacked by Taliban forces in the fall of that year.
We got to Cop Keating, and when I say we, I mean Bravo Troop, in end of May of 2009. And there were 2 platoons down at Cop Keating, which was in the bottom of a very austere bowl in northeast Afghanistan. I was in charge of the COP. And then on the morning of October 3rd, our unit was attacked by roughly 300 to 400 Taliban fighters. We were about 53 in numbers. That enemy action right there was one of the situations where a series of events leads you to a place in life that you never thought you would be, and you have to use everything you've gathered to that point in time to successfully do what you're supposed to do and come out on top. The rate of incoming fire, both direct and indirect, was overwhelming. I mean, when indirect fire hits, even when it's a little ways away, you can feel it, right? I mean, there's this wave of that air moving or other debris that you can feel. And when that's happening around you, everything is loud. It's a full shock on not only your ears, your eyes, you can feel everything that's going on. Those first few hours where that overwhelming amount of firepower was out there was really trying to just manage the situation and start to bring your assets online so that you can decrease their rate of fire and you can take control of the battlefield.
His outnumbered men eventually repelled the sustained and well-coordinated attack. Andrew Bundermann was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Staff Sergeants Clinton Romachet and Ty Carter were awarded the Medal of Honor for their actions.
We spent the entire day defending, counterattacking, and then defeating that enemy. And in the process, unfortunately, we lost 8 Americans. I certainly think about those 8 guys every single day and try to think about what their families have had to go through and then continue to move past. Katie and I and the kids and everybody we're around understands the blessings and the joy and everything we have each and every day that others might not get to experience as much. So we need to really be thankful for all those things, not just occasionally, but more often than we think.
Ben Kopp served in the U.S. Army and was deployed to Afghanistan in 2009.
Ben was my only child, and I raised him as a single mother, so my grandfather was truly the strongest male role model that Ben knew. My grandpa encouraged the independence of a young boy by teaching him everything he needed to know about fishing and motors and boats and things like that. When Ben was 7, my grandpa put a fillet knife in his hand and taught him how to clean fish. And he said, how are they going to learn if you don't allow them to try? It's my grandfather's service that caused my son to want to join the military. 9/11 to Ben was personal. To him, it was the mockery of his great-grandfather's service to America. And he made a declaration as we were watching the footage together in his bedroom that when he was old enough, he was going to find Osama bin Laden, become an Army Ranger, and make him pay. He left for basic training just 1 month after he graduated from high school, 1 month to the day. And 7 months later, he was assigned to the 3rd Battalion Ranger Regiment. And then comes the spring of 2009, and they're on their way to Afghanistan. They were given advanced knowledge that they could expect heavy combat. They were going into what they called a hot zone, a place that hadn't been visited by combat for a long time. There was a firefight with the Taliban. There was 3 Ranger snipers who were pinned down and had nowhere to go. They called in for backup, and backup wouldn't come. They were in too dangerous of a zone to even send backup in, but Ben was close by with his gun team. He was a gun team leader, so Ben came forward, and he saved those 3 Rangers. And then 9 days later, I got the phone call from his company commander that he'd been shot by a sniper, had undergone surgery, and they were awaiting him to wake up. Ben landed at Walter Reed 4 days after he was shot. My mother and I were flown out there. We went together, and on July 15th, the next morning, the doctor in charge of his care told my mother and I they believed that he was brain dead. So from my arrival to his removal from life support, which was late in the day on 19 July, I had 5 days with him at the hospital. And if I live to be 200, no 5 days will ever mean as much to me as those 5 days.
Ben Kopp was credited with saving the lives of 6 service members in combat, and as an organ donor, others stateside. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. In the years following 9/11, U.S. military forces were also deployed to Iraq. The campaign in Iraq was initially aimed at deposing Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, but U.S. forces quickly became engaged with fighting the terrorist group al-Qaeda, and later the Islamic State, or ISIS.
Jump forward with me to 2003, an invasion of Iraq. That invasion proves to be a controversial one, and as soon as Saddam Hussein is ousted, there's a wave of violence that hits American forces, and not long after that, American soldiers are facing acts of terrorism. Terrorists go to Iraq. We actually end up facing some of those same terrorists that we were facing in al-Qaeda.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So, in the early phase, again, this is a successful military campaign in the beginning to displace Saddam and his government and his leaders, and that it's not a fight without casualties, and there's a lot of combat goes on to that, but it ultimately is a successful campaign. But what happened in the wake of that is that by removing the government and by removing all elements of the security forces in terms of that, there is a vacuum that is created. And in that vacuum gave rise to these Sunni extremists. And very quickly, elements linked to al-Qaeda took advantage of that. And so by the late summer, early fall of 2003, we're already beginning to see these attacks that are taking place at an alarming rate now against Americans and other coalition partners here. Then we enter into a very significant campaign against all of them that persists for several years.
In 2003, a then Captain Patricia Baker was part of the initial invasion of Iraq as the commander of an aviation regiment.
We were on a war footing. At first you're eager, then you're excited, and you're waiting to cross the border as you stage people and equipment in Kuwait. But then you cross the border and it's nothingness. You grow up a Minnesota farm kid. You're used to county roads and oak trees. You fly across the border from Kuwait into Iraq. You're flying in a helicopter a few hundred feet above the Iraqi desert. And for hundreds of miles, there is nothing but Iraqi desert. Not a town, nothing. It's like the moon. It's like looking at a picture of the surface of the moon. We crossed the border and we were actually feeling a little bit cavalier. We thought there'd be more of a fight. We thought there would be more fight in the war zone that we'd just entered. But everywhere that we landed, things were abandoned. The military forces that we'd been briefed on for months were vacant, gone. Oh, we thought it was going to be a very short war. We were very convinced. The fight came, just not at first. Although the banner that was unfurled on that naval vessel declared success and kind of gave a sense of finality, exactly the opposite was true.
Violence against U.S. forces increased as Iraqi militants aligned with the terrorist group al-Qaeda, leading to years of attacks and suicide bombings.
Now we were in a war fight. Every aircraft was filled with my fellow soldiers that needed to be time on target at a certain location in a military grid that I had to hit with my GPS with every airframe in my company at an exact time, because another wave of helicopters and another wave of helicopters and another wave of helicopters was going to be bringing in more and more soldiers to conduct that assault. We were in the fight and we were doing risky 4 a.m. type of air assaults, clearing towns and villages, sweeping out insurgents, and it was kinetic. It was door guns blazing. It ended up being 38. That was the total count for that year. 38 named battles and campaigns.
Patricia Baker's deployment ended in 2004, after dozens of combat engagements and her unit's capture of deposed Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein.
It didn't end the war. It just made the news. I got back to Fort Hood, Texas in the 3rd week of March 2004. And I was changed. I was 29, but when I came back, I could have passed as 50. I was different.
Eric Kerska served in the Minnesota National Guard's 1st Brigade Combat Team and was deployed to Iraq multiple times.
We ended up being, by everything I've ever read, we were the longest continuous brigade in Iraq of the entire war. Those are three total years of my life, if you add all the weeks and months up. Saying goodbye to your family is never easy for anybody, and I got to do that a few times.
Eric was first deployed to Iraq during Operation Desert Storm and twice in the years following 9/11, including what he calls the long deployment.
I was there for Iraq #1 also. It was a tough environment. No phone calls, no showers, MREs 3 meals a day for months straight. We just lived out in the desert. It was like something out of an old West movie, except we had tanks. So the first time, the Iraqi people loved us, the Shia in southern Iraq. They loved us. We interacted with them. There was no fear. There was no terrorism. And then in 2006, I found myself back in that same area, and I can't go see those tomato farmers because it's too dangerous. 17 months or 16 months, whatever, we stayed in country of fear. You know, it was a very lethal time. Every day got worse. The explosive form projectile was the most lethal weapon in the war in Iraq from 2003 until 2011. If you look at the statistics, what killed the most Americans, it was the EFP. It's an Iranian weapon that was employed in the Shia parts of Iraq, and it had a 90-some% casualty rate. It was a big problem, and it scared the hell out of everybody because there was no armor. It would go through an M1 tank. And our guys defeated it through using pencil and ruler and engineering paper. We knew we couldn't save the vehicle. We could have the EFP hit the vehicle where the people weren't. And that was our secret, and it worked for us.
Eric's unit devised a method for operating their convoys to better protect against deadly, explosively formed penetrator weapons. Their innovation saved the lives of countless Minnesota soldiers.
You can't beat Minnesota soldiers. I don't care what anybody says. It's got to be something in the water. I don't know what it is, but go back in history. You tell me I'm wrong. I mean, there's something special about this place, and we had the best of the best. And so we set out to bring everybody home, and we did. My best day was December 18th, 2011, when we got everybody out of Iraq alive.
Terrorist attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq continued for years and evolved over time. After the al-Qaeda insurgency, the Islamic State, or ISIS, arose to threaten the entire region. Paul Braun served with the Minnesota National Guard in Iraq. During his time in country, Paul's unit was assigned an Iraqi interpreter nicknamed Philip Morris due to the cigarettes he smoked.
You always had a standoffishness with the interpreters for the fact that even though you can begin to trust them, if an interpreter's family is kidnapped, then they say, we will kill your family if you don't try and harm soldiers. On this particular tour, we had an interpreter that was assigned to us who ended up working for the militia. So we needed to have another interpreter, and they came up and said, we're going to give you this guy.
What did you think of Paul when you met him? He scared everyone at the base, all the local nationals. He has a unique hairstyle, mohawk. And it's hard to tell if he's serious, mad, angry, or happy.
When we first started working with Philip, we started to become pretty good friends. And even though he's an Iraqi who we're still at war with, he was someone that was working with us. And we always had to have that terp duty mentality. What if someone kidnapped his family? What if he tried to turn on us? But there was just something about him.
After a while, me working with Paul and Minnesota National Guard, the MPs, we got like really close to each other. I knew he's a good guy. I don't know how, it's hard to explain it. There is some feelings it's hard to explain. But you have this feeling, this guy or this person, you related to him somehow.
He literally became one of us. There was nothing different between him and any of the other service members that we were with. We became that close as a brotherhood.
Iraqi insurgents targeted interpreters who worked with Allied forces, and threats to Philip's life increased over time.
At this point of the war in 2009, the British and the American forces had a bit of a disagreement in our leadership between Blair and Obama. Pretty much overnight, the British said, we're done, we're not coming back anymore.
And all of a sudden, the British, they decide to leave behind all the translators. One day, they brought like 17 or 18 dead body from interpreters. And I was the interpreter for Paul with the families who brought the dead bodies to the military base. So am I gonna be like this one day or not? And which was like so scary, you don't know what's your future.
As his tour ended, Paul resolved to bring Philip and his family to Minnesota.
When I got back to the United States, Philip did everything he could for me to return home to my family. I wanted to make sure that he would be able to make it here safely with his.
We are lucky because we taste the bad life and now we tasting the great life. America, it's a great country. But the country, it's not just land and sky. The country is land, sky, and people. People make it great. You know, it's great to wake up in the morning without any fears. Honest to God, every single day, it's a gift from my God.
This is the notebook that, I picked up at Kmart that night and basically just started writing down my story. I'm so glad I wrote down the details. And it's not that I wouldn't feel the raw emotion of it. I still do, and I think about it every day. But the details fade, and I don't want them to fade. I want them to be real, so when people ask me, I can tell them. And share like I am today with you guys, share those details because I think they're important. I feel honored to have been there, and that sounds really strange. But I'm honored to have been there so I can tell the story, so I can bring credibility to what others have written about and talk about the little nuances of the people in the stairwell and the firemen and all the things going on around me and making it real for people. Everybody has a desire, as I did with my World War II Pearl Harbor veteran family member. It's like you want to touch it. People have an overwhelming desire to touch an event if they couldn't be there. And I think I have the privilege of bringing that to people.
This is a documentary packed with Minnesota stories. What would you say to those Minnesota veterans? How have Minnesota veterans played a part in the global war on terror?
I can tell you, as the CENTCOM commander for 3 years, I traveled around the region and went to every country multiple times. And I'm here to tell you the Minnesota National Guard was the most deployed National Guard organization in the CENTCOM AOR. I think our veterans in this state should be very, very proud of their service. They rose to the occasion. They did it multiple times. We have a lot to be proud of.
Since 9/11, I think sometimes we forget that that one day impacted so much of the life we now experience.
Going back to 9/11, it's important that people understand the why. And sometimes you find out that the world isn't a nice place. And there is a time and place for the military.
9/11 sealed my son's fate. I believe that with all my heart.
I think we saw true Americans come out of that disaster. And I just wish it could have lasted. I wish we had that patriotism all the time.